12 years. 12 years of your life sitting in a building 5 days a week. And right now, today, you are making financial decisions using a system that never taught you how money actually works. Not one class, not one single lesson on assets versus liabilities, not one session on compounding interest, not 1 hour explaining why some people build wealth across generations while others spend every decade of their adult life working for people who already did. Think about that. 12 years. And the one subject that determines where you live, how you live, who you depend on, and what options you have, was never taught. You learn the quadratic formula. You memorize the dates of wars. You diagram sentences and label parts of a cell. You have never thought about since the day you left that building. But the one subject, the single subject, that quietly controls every decision you make as an adult was never on the curriculum. That was not an accident. That was a design decision. And in the next few minutes, we are going to follow that decision all the way back to the people who made it, the year they made it, and the reason they gave. And the reason they didn't. Because once you see the architecture of the system that shaped you, something changes. You stop blaming yourself, and you start asking better questions. There is a concept in institutional psychology called functional containment. This is where most people stop paying attention. Don't. Because this single idea explains more about your financial life than almost anything you were taught in school. Functional containment is not a conspiracy theory. It is a documented organizational behavior. It describes how large systems, governments, corporations, educational bodies shape populations to serve a specific function without explicitly saying so. Here is what that means in plain language. A workforce that can read, follow instructions, show up on time, and complete assigned tasks is extremely valuable to an industrial economy. That workforce keeps factories running, offices staffed, systems predictable. But here's the part that changes everything. A workforce that understands compound interest, asset accumulation, equity ownership, and passive income does not behave the same way. They ask different questions. They make different decisions. They leave systems that depend on them staying. So the system adapts, not by lying, by leaving things out. The school system was never designed to make you wealthy. It was designed to make you useful, and it worked. In 2015, the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, ran one of the largest financial literacy studies across 18 countries. The result was not just surprising, it was uncomfortable. Only 17% of adults could correctly answer basic questions about compound interest, diversification, and inflation. 17%, which means 83% are making financial decisions without understanding the rules of the game. These were not uneducated people. These were people with degrees, certificates, years of formal education. The study reached a conclusion most people miss. Financial literacy is not a byproduct of education. It has to be taught directly. And in most systems, it isn't. But here's the part that should make you pause. The data showed that financial knowledge had a stronger impact on wealth outcomes than income did. Read that again. What you know about money matters more than how much you earn, which means two people can make the same salary and end up in completely different lives. Not because of effort, because of understanding. That gap is not random, it is structural. If this is hitting you harder than you expected, if something is starting to connect right now, subscribe and turn on notifications, because every video on this channel is designed to give you the lessons you were never given. To understand why this happened, you have to go back to 1893, not to a classroom, to a decision, the Committee of 10, formed by the National Education Association, led by Charles Eliot, president of Harvard. Their task was simple: decide what every student should learn, once, for everyone. They debated languages, sciences, history. They standardized the structure of education, and in all of their discussions, financial literacy never appeared as a priority, not once, because the students they were designing for were not imagined as wealth builders. They were imagined as participants in a system, workers. Eliot wrote that education should prepare students for the duties of life. At that time, those duties were clear: factory work, clerical work, domestic labor, The wealthy did not rely on public education for financial knowledge. They had private systems, private conversations, private access. The curriculum was not missing something by accident. It was complete for the role it was designed to produce. Stay with this, because what comes next is the part most people feel but have never heard explained. They didn't fail to teach you about money. They succeeded at teaching you to work for people who already understood it. The story doesn't end there. In 1902, John D. Rockefeller funded the General Education Board. At the time, he was the wealthiest man alive. He understood capital, ownership, and compounding at a level almost no one else did. The board's mission was to expand education. But one of its key architects, Frederick Gates, wrote something that reveals the mindset behind it. The goal was not to create thinkers, or innovators, or independent wealth builders. The goal was to create, in his words, a population suited for the needs of commerce and industry. Pause on that. The people who understood wealth the most built systems that didn't teach it, not by mistake, by design. Subscribe and turn on notifications if you're starting to see this clearly, because this is just the surface. Let me ask you something, and answer this honestly. When you were growing up, when money was tight or unpredictable, or never quite enough, did anyone actually explain why? Not emotionally, not through stress or silence, but clearly. Did anyone sit you down and explain how money grows, how interest compounds, how assets generate income? Or did you absorb a feeling, a quiet belief that money was difficult, that wealth belonged to other people, that there was a line you were not meant to cross? Now think about the adults around you. How many of them could explain an index fund? How many understood the difference between income and assets? How many were ever taught? If the answer is none, that is not a coincidence. They learned what you learned, and they passed it forward. Survival, not strategy. This is where most people feel something shift, because what felt like a personal failure starts to look like a missing instruction, and missing instructions can be corrected. The system didn't keep you poor by taking your money. It kept you uninformed about how it moves. This model didn't start in one country. It spread. The British education system created two tracks, one for leadership, one for labor. Elite institutions taught governance, economics, and power. Public systems taught structure, obedience, and function. Different knowledge, different outcomes, same society. That framework scaled, and it still exists. Today, many education systems still do not require a single course in personal finance, not one. After more than a century of formal education, the most practical subject in adult life remains optional. That is not oversight. That is continuity. Here is the one thing this video is asking you to do. Just one. Find one person in your life who has never been taught how money actually grows. Sit with them. Walk through it. Real numbers. Real time. Show them what consistency does. Show them what understanding changes. Because that single conversation can alter decades. The chain continues when knowledge is assumed instead of taught. You can interrupt it right now. And here is the part almost nobody prepares you for. When you start to understand money later in life, it doesn't just create clarity. It can create emotion, frustration, regret, even anger. Because you start to see decisions differently. You start to see time differently. You start to see what you were missing. That experience has a psychological weight, and most people are not taught how to process it, which means they either ignore it or let it stop them. But there is a way to move through it without getting stuck, and that is what the next video is about. Subscribe now and turn on notifications so you don't miss it. Because the next video is not about money itself. It is about what happens inside you when you finally understand it. Before you go, complete this sentence. Growing up, the one thing nobody ever taught me about money was one word. Drop it below. I read every single one.